ahead and start with roll call. We'll start with town council.
Linda Sosa.
Jim Sayers.
Brant Murray.
Ann Lepinen.
And for planning and zoning, this is Amanda Podmore, chair.
Marcia Haydenfeld.
Ed Dobson.
And we have two excused absences for Malia Collins and Brian Whitney. And then town manager.
Erin Nelson.
Okay, welcome everybody. So we are starting a little bit late today. We'll try to wrap up within an hour. Our agenda today is first to discuss the draft aviation ordinance, and the second item that we'll retain for the last 15 minutes of the call of the meeting is discussing the master fee schedule and the need to include partition fees. Any questions about the agenda?
No.
So a little framing for our discussion today. You all have before you either virtually or in paper, electronically or in paper, copy of a draft aviation ordinance sent by the town lawyer. The challenge we have before us today is we are looking at a shorter and narrow aviation ordinance that would put limitations or restrictions on where aviation can take place in the town. The Planning and Zoning Commission would really like to work jointly with the town on this because, as you'll remember, we were not able to come to a recommendation on what to do with aviation and commercial zones. But we did have a much broader recommendation for tackling all types of aviation throughout the town. But before us is a more narrow ordinance. So our challenge today, I think, is making sure that within this smaller, more narrow ordinance, we can still be responsive to what we heard from the public and make sure we're anticipating any aviation-related challenges that might come before planning and zoning. Because what sometimes happens with planning and zoning, you may be aware, we write an ordinance and then 6 months later we realize, oh, we forgot such and such. So we're trying to be as inclusive as we can in this while noting that Chris recommended we take a more narrow approach to that. So, do you want to say something?
If I might add to that, when we received the recommendations from planning and zoning, my concern that I raised with Chris was that the public hearing specifically narrowed in on commercial aviation. It did not address hot air balloons. It did not address, specifically did not notice or address these other pieces of in the air kinds of things. And while it's really appropriate for us to continue to work on a broader ordinance, my concern that I raised with Chris was we specifically had narrowed it to commercial aviation and zones versus drones or hot air balloons or anything. It's something that the town council and our attorney really want planning and zoning to go back to. But just to be on the safe side, we wanted to keep it more narrow and fixated on this piece. So go ahead, Amanda.
Go ahead, Marcia.
If I could ask a question relevant to this, I believe, could you talk about the timing on the aviation hold we have as a town and what we're looking to do for timing of an aviation ordinance?
Okay, so the moratorium, assuming I did my calculations correctly,
Okay.
will expire October 11th.
Okay.
And because every lawyer I know counts those days differently, you either exclude the day that you start or you exclude the last day. So to be on the safe side, I would say we have to do something by the 9th,
Okay.
October 9th. And if we choose not to pass an ordinance by that date, the moratorium will expire and it'll go back to the default, whatever that looks like.
Thank you.
So for today's discussion, I think we want to think about high-level edits or changes to make in this document that then one of our entities can move forward with, like putting into the latest draft. I do want to avoid us getting into the weeds about discussions that have already occurred in the past or things that going into like minutia about public comment, so as chair of this meeting, I will try to keep us in a forward-moving direction in this meeting. So I recommend first we take a look at the opening section of the ordinance, the whereas section that sets about the why and the what of this ordinance, and suggest any changes that we want to see to that. I will start by sharing what the Planning and Zoning Commission discussed in our work session, which was that we noted that throughout this, and including in the whereas, it says airport, so that needs to be changed to airstrip. Second, under the whereas positions, under item C, it singles out helicopter tours in particular, and it's important to the commission that we take a broader look at commercial aviation, not just helicopters, and so we suggested changing that to aviation in item C. And then under F and G, we found the language to be, I guess I just would say rather negative, would you?
Negative, yes.
Yeah, and so we'd like to rephrase that in the final version of this. So I guess I would turn it to town council. Any general changes or recommendations you have for the opening whereas clauses?
I didn't have any questions. It looked clear to me. It starts with the authority, which is where these generally start, and it just follows from that, so it looked good to me.
This is inclusive of drones?
It is not inclusive of drones.
Well, as it reads, I do not see drones excluded.
What?
Manned or unmanned is not in there.
Nothing's in there except commercial aviation as a sentence, Jim, and that's one of the concerns.
But the first definition is aircraft. And don't they say
Yeah, it defines aircraft to mean fixed wing airplanes or rotary wing helicopters.
Jim, do you have the current copy?
I believe I do, but can you not have a fixed-wing aircraft drone, a helicopter drone?
Go ahead, Marcia.
Jim, that actually is one of the discussions we had, is that if this, according to this copy, it's the term aircraft means powered fixed-wing airplanes or rotary wing helicopters used for transportation of people or cargo. And our discussion involved aviation types and definitions, including drones, hot air balloons, whatever. So one of the comments P&Z made was exactly that. Where are the rest of the aircraft in this? But it goes back to Ann's discussion of timeliness. Maybe it's just commercial for our discussion today. And I think that's a big one myself.
I just see nothing in here that excludes drones, but that's okay. It can be refined later, that's fine.
And
Chris.
you want to
I
exclude
just don't
drones.
think that there's anything in here that excludes drones.
Well, I think it goes back to the notice requirements, Jim. The notice requirements, both the written, how we noticed it, and then how it was presented. There was not, and maybe my recollection is bad, but I don't recall that there was any discussion in general in the public meeting about drones or hot air balloons or anything. And so to make sure that we didn't get into trouble with notice requirements, just narrow it down to what we're talking about right now, and then allowing planning and zoning to go back and expand on those others. Okay.
And Chris recommended that as well. So, yeah, as written, this is discussing fixed wing airplanes, rotary wing helicopters, and then it does mention hot air balloons. No other types of devices are discussed. Okay.
And so maybe H, maybe add in the future to the end of that sentence. Since it doesn't look likely.
Well,
Sorry, can you elaborate on that, Lewin?
Well, it's a BLM place, and it's a strip, it's an airstrip, it's not an airport. So to get to a commercial point would take millions of dollars to get point, so maybe just, it, like, can't do it right now.
So you'd like H to recognize the challenges of expanding the airstrip to
Well,
commercial
Or
facility?
just that we encourage it to be there is
Mhm.
fine, but it can't just be encouraged to go there today.
Okay. I think the language probably encompasses that as is. I mean, I don't know if we need to be specific about the timing. Marcia?
Well, I mean, I agree with Luann that the sentence was not, I wrote a sentence that says, "The town finds that the location of the Bluff airstrip is appropriate for aviation use with the least impact on residents and is in the process of evaluating the uses available and potential build-out
Yeah,
of the
that
Bluff
sounds,
airstrip
I like that.
for
sentence.
future aviation growth."
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's a very clear
Because
sentence.
I think yeah.
Okay.
I think we both read it the same.
Nice. Yeah, let's go. Marcia has made some edits in a Word doc, so we can do that.
Okay, so can you read the edit again?
Yeah, so H would be scratched and would read, "The town finds that the location of the Bluff airstrip is appropriate for aviation use with the least impact on residents and is in the process of evaluating the uses available and the potential build-out of the Bluff airstrip for future aviation growth within Bluff."
Isn't town council at least in communication at the moment
Yes,
with?
and we have been for
Yeah.
a couple of months, yeah.
To kind of find out what's allowed.
Yeah, BLM moves even slower than we do.
Okay.
Okay,
Why don't we move to the definitions section? So in that, we've defined aircraft, it defines aviation facility, it defines heliport, defines hot air balloon and noise-sensitive land use. I, for one, would like the hot air balloon just to also reference the word aerostat, which is the technical term, for what it's worth.
it's Aerostat.
Yeah.
AEROSTAT.
Anybody like to see any changes or additions to the definition section? Marcia?
Well, we had, Brian had compiled a list of aviation terms as in what flies, what are flying machines. And it may behoove us to include a copy of that list or a version of it so that drones later or whatever we put in later would be included in this. I don't know the now or later part. I'm really against passing something that isn't complete, but if it's going to be a smaller version right now, at least it could include updated information of what aircraft is. Aircraft on.
Marcia, I would lean against including others at this point because we want to take, when we update this in the future to talk about other types of aircrafts, we might want to have a broader discussion about what else, revisit that list at that point, and so I'm wondering if it's worth having it in at this point in time.
Okay.
And I think there's always an opportunity there for somebody to try to tack it on and wedge it into the actual ordinance and say, well, they really meant this. Or to take it out and just piecemeal it and say, here it is. But I do think that when you planning and zoning goes back to it, that's a good place to start.
Okey dokey. You can put resolved on that one.
Okay. Okay, moving on from definition section is the aviation facilities statement of policy. Any comments on that? Do you want to speak to your comments, Marcia?
Did I make a comment on that one? I think, oh yeah, I said, if you're talking about the town of Bluff aviation facilities shall be encouraged for development at the airport, I actually put in my notes, do we have control over that? And when and how will it be allowed? And do we want an airport or landing strip? And it goes to number 3. So in other words, it is the policy of the town of Bluff that aviation should happen at the airport. That's not our policy at the moment. Well, that's not how I should put it. It might be our policy, but we can't do our policy. We don't have control over what we can do out there. That's kind of my understanding anyway. So we're really basically on number 3, 030, that says we can't use it, so we want to do other things. So I'm a little confused, I guess, is while it might be our idea to use the airstrip, we can't.
As the lessee, Anne or Luann, can you speak to that?
Say that again? I'm mulling
So-
over the word policy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'm
that's,
stuck. Okay, so other words that come to mind would be like,
It's a
it is
good
the,
idea.
it is the mission. It is the mission of the town of Bluff to encourage the development of the Bluff airstrip. So where we are right now, if I understand the BLM correctly, is, one, we do not have a signed lease. It's been extended verbally, but the appraisal had to be done, which I believe was done the end of June. I don't know if the BLM has it back yet, and I don't know if Jim Hook had any more information about it, but we have not seen a lease, excuse me, to sign. So when that comes back, then if the town is going to sign it, then the conversation would go back to talking to the BLM and FAA about what requirements we would have in order to extend it to other types of uses. Right now, it's recreational, for lack of a better word, recreational only. But until we get that lease back and we decide to continue with the lease, then it would be at that point that we could move forward. Now, we're stuck, and this is the piece that makes it really difficult, is that with the Bears Ears management plan, we cannot control, we cannot even recommend or ask to have a commercial use until the Bears Ears management plan has been finalized. The discussion that I had with BLM then by letter was like, can we have an exception? This was recommended by our attorney, to ask in writing, not just verbally, but in writing, for an exception to expand it. And I got back a letter that basically you can ask, and these would be the requirements, but since we don't have a lease, it's putting the cart before the horse. Probably the practicality of the Bears Ears management plan is that if it doesn't get finalized, if it gets finalized in this presidential term and we switch back to a Republican president, it may very well take another dive and we throw this one out and start over. So I think relying on the Bears Ears management plan finalization is probably not the best route, because we could be tied up in this for a long time. So unless we get an exception and a lease, that's a long version of.
And the lease isn't in jeopardy.
No.
It's just always, it's a year-to-year lease,
It's actually,
been in-
I think it's a 10-year.
Yeah, it's in place, they're just waiting for that.
We could say it could be in the interest, it's in the interest of the town.
Or it is
Set
the
of
intent.
policy.
Yeah, or it
Yeah,
is the
that's-
intent.
thinking
That's-
intention.
Yeah.
It's in the interest of the town of Bluff.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we're interested in doing. To me, a long-term airport plan is a multi-year event, like a 20-year plan, like a highway. You know, it's not, you know, and I'm not an aviator, but I just know that things take a long time, so.
And
So-
then we need to look, I think, we need to look at our general plan. I don't think aviation was discussed in our general plan anywhere ever. And J'aviation is like Jones and DeMille, only they're specifically engineers for the airport. So this would be the time to get, like, I think in Marcia's thing, saying that we're proceeding on seeing what the potential is, have them look at it and see, besides the permits, what else needs to happen in order for that? How much would that cost to make that? How many permits would we need to do? It's a complicated process to put up an airport. But that, with the recreation you know, you can put your own landing pad and stuff, and that's where, you know, the P and Z was looking at that, which opens a whole nother can of worms as far as people and neighbors and whatnot. So I think keeping recreation stuck with commercial, they all need to be the same place, in my opinion. But anyway, that's, Javiation could be contacted to find out the feasibility. They're the ones that would do a feasibility study on that airport, on the potential of changing it up. If, after public hearing, the town wants commercial fuel and lights and power and water and whatnot out there that you would need for commercial.
You know, a charrette is where you take property and say, this is kind of what it could be. And I'm sure there's an airport, process for an airport to grow.
One of the things that we discussed earlier was putting bark out there as a kennel, a holding pen, because that's away from people, it's not noisy, you know, avoids all that, and they said absolutely no. This is airport use only. Doesn't seem like a perfect spot for that too. But something next to it would be fine, but we couldn't use the airport itself. So there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of complication.
So seeing how it's written now that we will change it to say it's our intention, the town's intention to further develop this and explore what can be done there. But given these uncertainties, that's why Chris suggested we put in place a conditional use process. Chris recommended the conditional use be available for the development of aviation facilities in A1 or A2. Again, you'll remember planning and zoning did not come up with a recommendation for what to do, where exactly commercial aviation should occur, but in our work session, we did determine that A1 was not something that we'd ever envisioned being a space for aviation, because A1 is like open spaces, private parks, like the Bluff Park is A1, for example. So we discussed in our work session having a conditional use process potentially for A2 and A3 zones. But here I'd put it to discussion for the group of if we have a conditional use process, in what zone district should that be available for commercial aviation?
Anyone?
Marcia?
I just put commercial question mark, meaning that I believe that if we're gonna have requests for commercial aviation of any kind, or whatever might be happening in the future, I say, in my opinion, C2 or 3 or whatever we all decide, should have a conditional use possibility. That's, you know, if you think about, there are perhaps some commercial lots in this town that would meet the criteria for something, helicopters, airplanes, the new airplanes that go up and down, whatever. If you were to say to someone, propose it to us, we'll tell you if you can do it, but we're gonna put conditions on it. So I don't think it just has to be agricultural. I think there could be the possibility of commercial. You can say no, or you can make the conditions, conditional use permit works well because it is specific to the site you're talking about. So a conditional use permit, if they come in, they say, look, I have all this space, I wanna put this here, you go, oh, you do have this space, but you better, and you give them the conditions. So I think something commercial should be included in that besides A2 or 3.
And good.
So, I've said this before, only not using the word conditional use. I am not a proponent of variances, and this is just another type of variance, where what you're saying is, we've zoned this, but we're gonna let you have a second bite of the apple by telling me you wanna do this. And then you get down into the weeds, and you'll have everybody making a request like, I wanna do this, I want an adult entertainment over here, I want a bar over here, I want this. I don't like variances, and I don't like conditional uses. I think they open up a huge can of worms. That being said, I'm only one person, and I don't know, I need to look at a map more thoroughly than I have and look at what agricultural versus commercial looks like. But my recollection of our zoning is that a lot of the commercial properties are abutting residential properties. But I'm not a proponent of conditional use, and I think that's something that we may end up needing to have Chris do a little discussion with us about, explaining pros and cons of conditional use.
If I might, Ann, that I want to be careful to note the difference because variances are issued only if you meet certain criteria and meet all of them.
I don't like either one,
I know,
that's what I'm
I know,
saying.
okay.
To me, it's just another version of a variance, but you're right, there's technically a difference.
There
Legally, there's
absolutely is a difference because.
But if you're gonna zone it. That's my feeling. Give it a zone.
It's truth to that too. but-
Anybody?
So you guys probably can't see this too well from here, but the point is that it's a very small town. We have cliffs on both sides, and we're very much neighbors to everybody, which is, we tried to make some residential neighborhoods, tried to put some, keep the business, but we've got business and residential now back side by side on the highway and whatnot. But if you, so A2 borders commercial in the case of the west side town specifically. I mean, it does everywhere here. So you could have a no zone right there, and then you can have it on the absolute next border over is okay. So like use my personal property, could be a heliport if A2 is allowed. I can fly right off 100 yards from where it's proposed.
So, in the map that Leon was showing too, the majority of the town, the public lands around it are zoned A1. So if we went with planning and zoning's recommendation to scratch A1 from that, that would not be open for the conditional use permits. But I'd like to hear maybe from every person we haven't heard from yet. You were leaning on conditional use, if so, where to have it?
I've been on the board 7 years. You guys got a pretty good idea about how I feel about land use ordinance and that stuff, I was on the board 8 years in another town. So I think it's the town's responsibility to plan and to do these activities. And I think for me personally, I think airport activities should happen at the airport.
Thanks, Brent. Ed, would you like to weigh in?
Well, I just had more weight and I realized I'm losing. So I better get it done while I can. I'm with Ann and Brad on that.
Thank you. Jim, would you like to weigh in?
I think the ordinance is pretty good and for the most part, as it is right now. So I guess I'm with Ann and Brand on that, and maybe Ed too.
Linda?
So what does that, does that mean that you want the conditional use with the A1 and A2? Because that's what the ordinance says right now.
Yeah, I'm in
Condition-
favor of the conditional use process, yes.
On A1 and A2?
Well, I don't have a map in front of me.
I think he's talking about conceptually, he believes
Yeah.
in conditional use.
Yeah, I'm being,
Well,
I'm
all
being
of you guys,
cloudy enough that you can interpret my words any way you want.
Well, that's why I'm just trying to, all of you guys agreeing with each other, I'm not exactly sure what that agreement was.
I agree with you, Luann. I have no idea what we're talking about.
Do you want a couple printed maps for folks to look at?
I have some idea.
What's the question? Are you asking me if A1 and A2 are where we should be instead of the airport? No.
Okay.
So
Then you
scratch
don't
that.
want the conditional use. Okay.
Yeah, I'm asking everybody their position on
You want to clarify the question?
030.
That's the question.
I'm asking everybody their position on a conditional use addition, and if so, what zones that should target.
My hearing's not great, and
I was asking everybody their position on a conditional use process, and if you if you say yes to conditional use, where you would like that allowed, which zones. But it sounds like you're,
Are you specifically asking about this conditional use or
Yes.
conditional use overall?
This.
That's
This.
what I wanna know
the conditional use in the ordinance,
in this.
yeah, for aviation.
I'll have to just refer to my attorney on that, you know, I'm not gonna, whatever's legal is what I'm for.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty much for the airport. You know, this is kind of a new one that, that the Bears, as I understand it, the Bears Ears Management Plan is not completed, so we cannot approve commercial aviation at the airport. We're unable to do that. And, until we're able to do that, you know, I mean, agriculture, A1, A2, again, I'm not sure where those are, but I think I really think that all these activities should be at the airport. That's what it's there for.
Okay, thanks, Stu. Linda, I'd like to hear from you too.
I agree that airport activities should be at the airport, and variances are not gonna help anyone in this because it's going to affect people, different people. And it's really, there's probably not gonna be any change soon for the Bears Ears, management plan.
Thank you.
But we just went to Salt Lake, last week and passed helicopter tours. We passed them in Moab, we passed them in Monticello, and probably other places, but those were the ones that, you know, were really easy to see. And none of them were inside the town. And Moab was 11, I don't know how many miles out, something like 11 miles out. And it's not as convenient, but it's safe.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Luann, do you feel like would you like to add anything on your position?
This is the one that was in the
No,
packet, right?
just clarifying the zoning
So that's-
part of it, that it's,
That's the one that's in the packet, right?
you know,
Yeah.
to say you
Okay,
can't do it in
that's
a
what I got.
commercial zone, but you can in A2 doesn't make any sense. If we're gonna zone it and do conditional use anywhere, it seems like it should be.
I'm sorry, I can't hear what
It
you're
should
saying.
be commercial, I mean, it should be a conditional use in commercial or A2. A1 is open space, that doesn't seem like a good mix, but there's also a lot of A1 where, could you hear me, Linda?
Yeah,
Sorry.
thanks.
So, and, I guess to state my position as well, generally I have the same concerns about conditional uses. However, because this was recommended by Chris, I think it should be considered, though I think it should say A2 and A3, not A1 zones. I do not think it should be in commercial. The other thing we should discuss is that, essentially the ordinance says if there's a conditional use process, if aviation facilities are to be developed, they must be, at least either 1,200 feet or 2,000 feet away from noise-sensitive land uses. So I think that's something we should also discuss. It defines a noise-sensitive land use as being close to residential, schools, cultural, religious facilities, health services, offices, lodging. So just noting that if that language is kept in, that any aviation facilities need to be at least 2,000 feet away from those sensitive land uses, I think that would pretty much preclude any commercial aviation, any aviation in commercial zones because of the proximity in our town of commercial zones to those different things, so.
She's down at 060 performance standards is where
Okay,
she's.
that's what I was just going to say, say which reference you
You
got.
skipped ahead.
Sorry,
No.
060, item C on, noise-sensitive land uses. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on that?
Well, just so you all know, feet to miles and whatnot, 5,000 is a mile, so 2,000 is pretty close to half a mile. So you're right, if that's in the ordinance, that takes out a lot of the valley.
I like 1,200 better, offering a few more options anyway.
Yeah, if the town keeps
Yeah, right.
that barrier, to like noise in the ordinance, you need to decide between 1,200 and 2,000 feet.
Or pick one, it could be 15, but.
Yeah.
As a comment, though, that's either gonna force people towards the river or towards the cliffs, right?
You could, but,
If you're keeping it away from commercial or residential, or excuse me, from residential areas.
Yeah.
well, perhaps we can pick a number like 1,200, put it in there and see if that works for, because I think he meant 1,200 and then used 2,000 in the next sentence is kind of what happened. B and C he switched out.
Yeah.
I like 1,200 better.
But if aviation use is restricted to the airstrip,
That's moot.
that is moot, yeah, exactly. So, ultimately a decision, I think, for town council.
Well, it appears, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Marcia.
I'm just a little, I just want to make sure, going back up to that condition, the actual, you either have it at the airstrip, which everybody likes the idea of the airstrip, we just don't even know that we can use it. So if we can't use it, and it says it right there, should the town determine that we can't use it, then we have to have, or, not have to, it is suggested that we have a process for someone to do it elsewhere, okay? So if we're not using the airport, the BLM says no way, then conditional use is in fact the way to offer it as another area. And those areas appear to be A2 and 3 from our discussion, and the commercial is the question mark. Then, once they do submit their request for conditional use of aviation, they have to meet the standards below when they apply, that 1,200 feet or 2,000 feet or whatever. And that seems to be, at least in my opinion, the way to control what the question is. Hi, I'd like to do this aviation facility, and it proposes this, and it keeps it within the rules of distance or whatever. Can I do it? And we give them conditions. So is that in fact what we want to say here? I think the message got mixed up a little bit going around the table. I like that idea that there's an opportunity to request something. Ann doesn't. And I understand that too. I do.
Yeah, I'm mulling it over because on the one hand, I really don't like variances and conditional uses. On the other hand, we have a lot of space around us. And part of it then gets back into a lot of that space in A1 and 2 are SITLA BLM pieces that you're not gonna be able to realistically do it anyway. Although SITLA might be willing to give us a big chunk for an airport if they get enough money. I think if a conditional use were in here, I would go for the further distance of 2,000 feet. Again, I'm pretty solid in my thinking in terms of not having a conditional use, but it doesn't mean I can't be swayed, which is why I'd like to get Chris McEnany's input, because I haven't talked to him about this, nor has anyone else on the council specifically about the aviation ordinance draft.
He was out of pocket for a while. Yes,
Right,
so.
right, yeah. He just got back in yesterday.
I think I'm of a similar leaning to Ann, that I'm not quite sure about conditional use and would like to talk to, or hear from Chris. I do like, though, that if it were to be conditional use, The submittals requirements for an aviation facility, so that's under section 040. If you look under 040C, it does require that they describe, the applicant would describe in detail, like, number of flights per month, the maximum number of aircrafts, et cetera. So I think there's ways in which, if we did go the conditional use route, there could be very detailed requirements that applicants have to meet in the conditional use process. I'm just doing a time check. We have about 5 minutes left before we move to the fee schedule.
So let me just ask, would it be helpful to all of us to have Chris weigh in so that we can ask these questions and get the same answer from the same person? Rather than my trying to paraphrase what I think I heard or what I heard and I misstate. Okay, so let me set that up. And if everyone would think about what questions specifically for Chris would you have?
And I think if priorities go, we should skip the fee schedule and finish whatever we're doing with this while we're all here together. Get the rest of the comments and ideas unless everybody's done. I have one more comment myself, but I think it's more pressing.
You want one more comment?
I do have
Okay.
another comment, just as far as like this conditional use with the 2,000 feet or the 1,200 feet or whatever. There are areas in town that would suit. And I'm looking at this great big old block out that's A2 right at the intersection of 191. So the airport is BLM's, but there's an area right there. Again, you're talking millions to even start on anything like that. But there are a couple of places. So you could still have commercial traffic within the town boundaries and still meet those conditions.
Thanks. Oh,
Good, that's what you want.
I have 2 comments to it.
Go,
but-
go.
The last page, under performance standards, it says under D, aircraft operations shall be positioned in a manner that provides shielding and buffering from adjacent properties. Just flagging that, that's not very well defined, the shielding or buffering. And if the airport, if we're only dealing with an airstrip, I don't think that shielding and buffering are necessary for out there. So flagging that for the final version.
I think there's rules about what that means, because it's not like you can put a fence on a runway. You're not allowed to.
Right.
So I think shielding and buffering has definitions or legal description for what an airstrip is.
Okay.
I flagged that also. I also think that on the, and C, given day, I mean, you could go given day, week, or month. But
Okay, under C, yeah. The other thing that I wanted to flag, under exemptions, which should be 061, but it says 060, last page, where it says hot air balloon flights are not subject to this chapter, and then emergency aircraft operations. Something that planning and zoning discussed a lot and that we heard through public comment was that vegetation control seeding is another use that might want to be excluded from this ordinance.
And then we need to think about the existing uses of helicopters that come into town. What's the intention of that? Of if the governor comes down, can he land here? If our wildlife people want to land, can they land? Are we doing away with all helicopters landing, personal, private, commercial, the whole 9 yards? We need to know that, because they've been landing. They traditionally land for years and years.
The oil guys used to land for lunch all the time.
Yeah, and they land. But landing out here at the old school, like, are all of those things off the table, or are some of those allowed? Like, I know planning and zoning talked about somebody's backyard. You can put an airstrip on a lot of these properties. And are they gonna be allowed to land? Is it, we need to look at,
That's why we're doing this ordinance, right, to
Yeah.
try to figure it out.
but it's private and commercial, or, you know, like, how are we
Yeah.
doing that? And then the other thing, back to, Amanda was looking at C, or one of you guys, sorry, on the noise ordinance part, this is a good start to the start of a noise ordinance, because this is 60 decibels that comes onto your property from somebody else's noise, just like the light comes onto your property from somebody else's light. So 60 decibels is the noise of a vacuum cleaner, that if you were running a vacuum cleaner right here, this is how much noise you would hear, but I'm not making the noise, it's you over there making the noise, and I'm hearing a vacuum here. So that's what he put into the ordinance.
Where's the decibel?
In C,
C,
60 C.
in 060 performance standards under C, it's on the second page of C. It's
Oh, it's on the back.
Yeah.
nearest noise sensitive land use is equal to or greater than
Yeah.
60 decibels.
Yeah.
And so when we've talked about the noise ordinance, that's the kind of thing, like if your neighbor's here, what are you putting on this property? So it, you know, kind of all ties together to look at it all, not just the
Yeah, because
air pieces.
this gives the town the right to deny an application if that noise is greater than 60 decibels.
sounds a little low to me, but
Okay.
I'd have to.
It depends on your
check.
space
Yeah.
around. If you have that space around your landing pad or your vacuum or your chainsaw or your dog or whatever's making the noise, if you have enough space around it, by the time it gets over there, the decibels go down. So it just depends on how they set it, and the noise of the machine landing. There's noisy helicopters and there's quieter ones, and on all things, vacuums included.
But you bring up a good point, Luann, that I think as written, this does not address any helicopters incidentally landing in town, and so the town needs to decide if they want to preclude that, or prevent that, and if so,
I'm not sure how you could. If a helicopter's flying over and lands, do we run up and go, keep moving, keep moving? I'm not sure what you're saying.
well, would
Well,
it,
they have to file a flight plan, generally speaking. As long as I'm talking, I'm just gonna finish what I have to think about here. I think if the attorney indicates that a conditional use permit is advisable for the town of some kind, some process, then I think that what you've got here, I think this work is good, and I think it'll work just fine. And my suspicion is that will be advisable to have some kind of process for doing this until we have an airport available to us. So I think all of these comments having to do with definitions are great, and the details have been really good. So we're kind of, this is a good document, and we need to talk to the attorney as to how advisable it is to include conditional use process of some kind. Thank you.
thanks, Jim. So I think we'll wrap up this section. Anne, do you want to be in charge of talking to Chris about?
Yeah, I'll get something set up with Chris, and I'll try to do a tally of best days and best times for everyone to keep this moving.
Okay. Great, and so let's spend the last 10 minutes on the master fee schedule. First of all, thank you, Town Council, for passing that, working on that. Planning and zoning reviewed it, and we just noted that a partition application fee was absent. Anything else, planning and zoning, that we noticed that was absent in the master fee schedule?
It looked good to me.
Has anybody else noticed anything missing? Have you noticed anything since we passed?
No, and
We've just been talking about aviation, so if we have a commercial aviation facility, it seems like there should be a business fee associated with that.
There is so the master fee schedule includes a conditional use permit application, which is $400, so I think that would,
That'd be the original application, but
Yeah.
then, is it just the $25 business fee, or is it, anyway?
well, they'd also have the site plan review cost, which is $500, and then probably business license.
And there's actually an airport section on the master fee.
But it's for the airport, it's not private people running their own show.
Oh, your airport section is if in fact we do things out there. So conditional use fee, should they also have to pay a site review fee? I don't think so. I think
No, when
those
we
are the
passed it, Marcia, let me just,
Yeah,
sorry to
but No,
interrupt.
please do.
So when we passed it, that was the question. We have the discretion to charge the higher fee or the lower fee,
Okay,
depending on the amount of work, but we wouldn't charge both fees.
thank you.
And we probably should footnote that somewhere, that there will be some discretion applied depending on what you're applying for. But that was the question that was raised in planning and zoning and we talked about.
Okay.
So I will ask to footnote that. And, you know, I don't know that we want to be, this is just me throwing this out, I don't know, to address Lou's concern, that we want to get so far down that we're telling people they have to pay to use their property, to charge a fee to land their own helicopter or their own drone or their own whatever. Because we do have the airport fees covered in a section and to be determined. But on the partition fees,
100,000 is what I wrote on the resume.
on the partition fees, coming back from Salt Lake, I think it was when we were talking about it, I can't remember, but that one idea would be to, you know, like the partition that just took place, it was one piece of land divided into two. So you determine the fee by the number of partitions you're doing. So if you're gonna partition it into 4,
Or petitions only
Petitions
into
only.
two.
so it's defined as only 2.
Then it's a
Then somebody come up with
subdivision.
an amount.
I think
Yeah.
it should be 200, based on the land use fees, item 9 is plat modification, right-of-way vacation, boundary line adjustment is 200. I think you should add partitions to that.
I think it seems.
Good.
And that's, I
That's
thought,
good.
that's what I
That's
was thinking
phenomenal.
too, it's
Work
not
it 'em out.
probably as complicated as the land use clearance, so I was wavering between 100 and 200.
I say 100.
You know, because it's not as complicated, it's just splitting, the same owner owns both, they're splitting it into 2, it's not that complicated. So I was sort of heading to 100, but 200 is like the land use clearance.
I like 100 as well. It's a very simple process of show us that you have the proper acreage and proper access to those 2 lots. And that, you know, it's a fairly straightforward process, so I think $100.
I'm not wedded to anything, so. And anybody have a different opinion, 100, 200?
Do I hear $50? Do I hear?
Well, yeah, anyway, it just progresses to the more complicated subdivisions, like a minor subdivision was 300, I think, and then a major subdivision is 500, but just a simple partition, you're not putting in, you're not determining the rest of it. If they wanna build, then they've gotta come back and do the
Yeah.
land use on top of that.
Okay, well, we have that, I think, on our agenda tonight for a vote, so if there's no other cleanup on here,
Nothing else that we identified.
okay.
Okay, any other items for our joint work session?
I know I had something,
Just noting, planning and zoning's next meeting is next Wednesday, the 20th, so we'll be in touch about what aviation issues, if any, will be on our agenda.
Should
We have a pretty packed agenda.
Should we try to figure out when we're all available to meet with Chris?
no. I think it'll be faster if I just ask Chris what his availability is. He's been out of the office for a couple of weeks, and when I talked with him yesterday, it was very abrupt on my end, because I only had limited time, and he said he'd be available off and on, so let me get some dates and times.
Okay.
And probably what I'll try to use are Tuesdays or Wednesdays of meetings, just where it's more likely than not that we'll be in town.
is it hopefully something like a Zoom phone call we could all be on kind of thing? I
Yep.
think that would be
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, we haven't had him, we haven't been having him come down, we've been doing
Right.
everything by
Cool.
virtual.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Anything else?
Second?
Okay, any discussion? All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion passes unanimously. We adjourn at 11:42 a.m. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda, that was great. You need to,
Oh.